Story 1. He was clearing snow off his roof. He even wore a harness and was secured by a climbing rope. But that rope was held by his wife, who was standing on top of the roof and weighs like half his weight. I don't know if that was intentional, but to me it looked like an "if you die, I want to die as well" situation. When I talked to him about it a few days later, he basically said his wife insisted on him being secured, so he agreed to this nonsense to make her calm. Lovely couple. Still married, still alive. Chuckles.
My grandfather once painted the side of the house the same way, but hanging out of a window, secured by bed sheets tied together into a chain like in a cartoon, held onto inside by my grandmother. Chuckles. The next-door neighbor stood there yelling up at him, asking what funeral arrangements he wanted.
That makes sense. I've fallen before and had a rope catch me. I don't care if a person was twice my weight. They would have been yanked off their feet. Sometimes it's better to just do something ridiculous and make them happy than to argue.
My grandparents' chimney was crooked as fuck because my grandpa and his buddies, mostly other family members, built it when they were drunk as fuck. His neighbor always says, the base of that thing is made of Schlitz cans, and that's why it's leaning. It kills me.
Story 2. Growing up, my neighbor did something that always made me laugh. Chuckles. He had an old riding lawnmower that always backfired when he turned it off. He got used to the timing of the backfire and would do a double finger gun shooting motion at the exact time of the backfire. He passed away many years ago, but he was always a very good neighbor to us, and my father always spoke well of him. When my father passed away last year, the neighbor's daughter came to pay her respects, and I told her that story. She had no idea. It was really nice to give someone a new story about their father.
My riding mower does that, and I do that, but I'm not dead, so I must not be your neighbor. Chuckles.
But you are now sentenced to do finger guns during the backfire for the life of the lawnmower. Chuckles, I don't make the rules.
My father passed away in the fall. While I was growing up, he didn't really have any friends because he was so focused on caring for me and my mom, who was sick for a while, like 15 years before she passed away. The man was dedicated to us in a way that I'm trying to emulate with my family, but unsurprisingly, I'm falling a little short. Either way, I always heard all these stories about my dad and all the great and not so great things he did when he was younger. Some from him, some from my uncles, some from just guys in the neighborhood. I didn't believe most of them. He was in his 40s when I was born, and I'm in my 40s now. To give the timeline some perspective, at his funeral, at least 50 guys I had never met before showed up. Not all at once or anything like that. Just a random 2 or 3 in a group here and there. All of them had a story about him. Most were about working for him and how he always took care of them. Some told me a few stories of bar fights at the repast that I had heard, but never believed, because to me, he was basically Danny Tanner who worked construction. It just goes to show that there's always a story out there that someone's loved one hasn't heard about them.
Story 3. Neighbor cutting his grass in the middle of a massive thunderstorm. Like, the biggest storm of the season. Just out there push-mowing his lawn. Chuckles.
I came here to share my own story about my weird neighbor and his lawn, so I'll just tack it onto yours. He stopped mowing his backyard when he moved in across the street. Called a meadow. Whatever. One night, my dad and I were watching a crazy dark thunderstorm from our porch. A massive lightning bolt lit up the sky, and in that second, we saw the weirdest thing ever. Our big-bearded, crazy-haired neighbor was buck-ass naked, prancing around his meadow like a gazelle. Then back to blackness, and we had to confirm with each other what we saw. We could also hear him practicing primal screaming between the thunderclaps, which we actually asked about, because we kept hearing it really late at night.
Dude, we've all been there. You want to get the raking done, but it turns out there are just too many fucking leaves. It starts getting dark, but you're like, I can still finish. It's just dusk. Next thing you know, the moon is out and you're still fucking raking. Everything hurts, but you can't give up now because the leaves will win.
One of my favorite memories is of me and my best friend. We're both in our mid-50s now, dancing around my front yard during one of those amazing late afternoon thunderstorms. We were fully clothed, and it was the late 80s, so our teenage hair was big and poofy and sticky with Aquanet, but we didn't care. We even managed to get a selfie with my old 110 camera. It was just a fun, carefree memory of a sweeter time. Everyone needs to dance in the rain at least once.
Story 4. I live in a condo complex. For one summer, every day around 4:30 to 4:35-ish, a woman driving a small Honda Civic would honk her horn furiously for about 10 seconds, stop her vehicle, roll down her window, and let out a primal scream before driving off at a normal pace. I always felt as though it was directed at one of my neighbors, but never knew which one.
I remember during COVID, the stress was really starting to get to me. Before and after every shift at the hospital, I would pull my car over somewhere I thought I wouldn't disturb anyone and just scream for a few minutes. Looking back, it wasn't long after I started doing that I had to go off for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So I guess it was my mental kettle boiling over. I hope no one saw me.
The management at the nursing home I worked in during the second wave, doing patient care, reusing disposable personal protective equipment, or simply not having any because they said they couldn't source any when we ran out, routinely being understaffed to the point of illegality, workers catching COVID being told, "We still expect you to work. There's a COVID hall you can work on," actually handed out self-care packets that included the suggestion to do exactly that, scream in our cars. They also suggested that we do more to balance work and life, prioritize nutrition and exercise, and make time for simple things like manicures. Yes, let me schedule that manicure in my less than 15 minutes of break time during my 16 to 20-hour shift. It'll have to be after the screaming, though. I hope you're doing better now. COVID was hellish in long-term care. I can't imagine how much worse it was in acute care. It seems like a lot of people have forgotten how bad it actually got.
I was out there during COVID doing home health as a physical therapist. It was horrible. I used to drive by the park either after work or even sometimes in the morning. I would roll down my windows and just sit there and cry. When I was done, I either just went to work if it was in the morning or went home if it was in the evening. Crying every damn day.
Story 5. Every night at 7 p.m., the neighbor lady went out on her front porch and yelled, "Yabba dabba doo," at the top of her lungs. Turns out, she was calling her 3 cats, Yabba, Dabba, and Doo. It absolutely made me smile every time I saw it. But people who didn't know thought she was bonkers. Chuckles.
My grandmother, a very prim and proper preacher's wife, had a dog named Pig. They were boarding a smaller plane, one where you walk out onto the tarmac to board. Pig got loose and was happily bounding across the tarmac. So of course she started calling for her. What was hilarious was that there was a police officer chasing after Pig. My grandmother was quite embarrassed, trying to explain to the officer that she didn't mean to call him a pig, but I don't think he believed her.
My friend has a cat called Big Boy. We dropped him home one day, and he said, "I'll call my cat over so you can meet him." He called for the cat as soon as the car stopped. "Big Boy. Hey, Big Boy, come over here." He didn't realize there was a policeman in the driveway next door. The neighbor had been robbed, until the young policeman interrupted with an awkward, "Are you calling me?" My friend was mortified, but the rest of us were cackling with laughter from the car. Chuckles.
Oh, this is absolutely wonderful. We had a neighbor years ago who used to call her cat by singing its name like an opera, and the whole street could hear her belting out Biscuit every evening around tea time. Chuckles. My kids thought it was the funniest thing and would run to the window to watch. I think half the charm of having neighbors is the little eccentricities you get to witness.
Story 6. My neighbor used to practice salsa dancing with his vacuum cleaner every Thursday morning around 6 a.m. Chuckles. I could see him through the kitchen window doing full spins and dips with that poor Hoover. Guy had some serious moves, though. The dedication was actually pretty impressive. He never missed the Thursday sessions.
Chuckles. Sounds like you never miss Thursday sessions either. Keeping a schedule. Clever man.
Girl, I'm living for this image. The fact that he's spinning with a vacuum cleaner at 6 a.m. on Thursdays is just commitment on a whole other level. I would be spying on him every week too, to be honest. The guy is a legend.
I would have knocked on his door and volunteered to be his dance partner, especially if he was handsome. Chuckles. That Hoover ain't the only thing that sucks.
Story 7. My friend told me this story. They had a nice neighbor fellow growing up who would regularly get high on drugs and transform into an orchestra conductor on his back patio late at night. He'd get really into it, from the quiet lows to the dramatic highs among each pretend instrument section. Then, completely drenched in sweat, once the song completed, he'd take a bow and retreat indoors. She said it was the funniest thing to watch. Chuckles.
For some reason, this unlocked a core memory. Chuckles. When I was in high school, one of the teams we played against in football was an inner-city team. The location had a reputation for being low-income, kind of hood. I say this knowing we were easily the second most ghetto school in the conference. Anyway, this big, tall dude, either in his early 20s or possibly a senior. He stands up, mean mugging the part of the stand where the marching band was sitting. He slowly reaches into his jacket, looks like he's pulling something out, and gleefully starts pretending to conduct the band. So funny.
When my child was really little, they loved when I would act out this really bombastic classical piece. Very rhythmic, big chords, dramatic discordant crescendos. They called it Big Song. One time we got home while it was starting to play in my car, so I acted it out with gusto while we were parked in my driveway. Really handed up. When I got out of the car, my neighbor applauded. I had no idea anyone other than my kid was watching.
Chuckles. It's just as humorous when taken seriously. In music school, we'd all very seriously wave our hands around in the air in front of a mirror while turning pages of scores. Hey, conducting is a skill. You gotta practice it. Are you pooping or masturbating or air conducting? I need to pee. My poor roommate.
Story 8. I went out for a cigarette at 3 in the morning and found my 82-year-old neighbor wandering around her yard with a flashlight. She had pink rubber gloves, kitchen tongs, and a full gallon-sized freezer bag of what I thought was dirt. I asked if she was okay and why she was out so late. She joined me for a cigarette and proceeded to tell me all about her slug hunting adventure. That bag was full of slugs.
My 88-year-old neighbor and I have a yearly competition of slug catching. There used to be a real infestation, so it was funny to see who caught the most slugs. I'm the reigning champion with 137 slugs in one day. Numbers have decreased dramatically since I took down their stronghold, the last bush in our garden.
My brother's neighborhood has the annual nighttime scorpion hunt competition. They use black lights because scorpions are fluorescent.
I have neighbors who are both in their early 90s now, and they have the best-looking yard on the block. I'm talking about the kind of yard that you swear they must get out a pair of scissors and trim the grass along the sidewalks because it's so perfect. They have a tree that drops acorns on the driveway and in the yard in the fall. They go out and rake under the tree and sweep the driveway every day, picking up the acorns once they start dropping. They don't hire anyone to do the work, and I only occasionally see a teenage great-grandson helping them, most often with snow removal, but even then, they're out there helping themselves. I stop and talk to them whenever I'm passing by. They're some of the absolute nicest people I've ever met. Warm smile. When I talked to them about how impressed I was with their physical activity at their age, they said their secret is that they both still go to the gym multiple times a week and do weight training.
Story 9. In the past 5 years, I've watched my neighbor, a guy who used to play golf with my father, descend into some sort of addiction. I haven't outright asked, but it seems like he abuses some sort of stimulant, whether cocaine or amphetamines. His wife and high school-aged kids are still very normal, living a standard middle-class life. But he's gotten up to some wacky stuff at night out in the yard. One time, he thought midnight was the perfect time to use an angle grinder to cut metal roof sheeting for his chicken coop and then start rebuilding the coop. I used to work very early, and it wouldn't be uncommon to see him out there mowing or weed whacking his lawn with a headlamp on. He decided to build a picket fence between my side yard and his. He made progress of about 3 pickets per day because he hand-shaped them all with an angle grinder. I'll give it to him, though. That fence came out looking very nice.
Oh, great. Now I know why I get funny looks from my neighbors. I love gardening, but a health condition I was diagnosed with a few years ago makes it dangerous for me to do anything even mildly more energetic than walking to the car when it's warm outside. I live on the edge of the desert. Because I love my garden, I just couldn't let it die. I've invested years and thousands of dollars. So I switched to gardening at night. It's not uncommon for me to be out there pruning and potting and fixing the reticulation at midnight. Nothing noisy, but it never occurred to me how the sudden shift in routine would look to the neighbors. Now I know.
I'll take one in the morning. I will say he did use a template, but he cut them out with an angle grinder, then radiused all the corners and sanded them in a way to look somewhat aged. I feel like anyone else would use a small assortment of other tools more suited to what he was doing.
I'm going to say it could very well be unmedicated bipolar disorder with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I know a guy who isn't on any medication. He's a sloth during the day, but a twitchy night owl who loves doing outside activities at night. He also way overdoes the intricacy of his projects.
Story 10. I discovered my neighbors are into pup play one night when I went to take the bins out at 2 a.m. and saw them going for a walk around the cricket oval across the road. Chuckles, lovely couple. Well-behaved puppy.
Animal role play. It could be sexual or a kink or not. Like playing at being a dog. Leashes, collars, sometimes masks and ears. Drinking and eating out of dog bowls, sleeping in a cage or a kennel. That sort of thing. He was on all fours, and she was walking him on a leash around the oval.
It's actually very against the rules in the kink community. By doing it outside of the house, they're involving other people in their scene without their consent, which is a huge no-no.
My province had COVID lockdowns with a curfew for a bit. You were allowed to be out after curfew if you were walking your dog. Cue a story about a wife fined for being out after curfew with her husband on the leash. She claimed she was walking her dog.
Story 11. When I was in university, the older neighbor across the street would walk to the edge of the road, lean her head over her next-door neighbor's driveway, pull a hairbrush out of her fanny pack, and brush her hair onto the driveway. Chuckles.
Chuckles, damn. I missed the word pack and was wondering why anyone would store their hairbrush in their vagina. Had to read that twice.
There's a reason that ladies' hairbrushes have those big, soft, fancy handles. Chuckles.
When I was about 12, some American family members came over to visit, bringing presents. Mine was a pair of jeans with embroidery on the back pockets. I had to put them on right away and soon wished I hadn't. My Uncle Ralph looked at me and loudly said, "Hey, Peggy's got flowers on her fanny." The whole room went silent. Cue ultimate mortification on my part.
Story 12. I live in an apartment complex, and one of my neighbors whistles nursery rhymes while walking around late at night. Normally, the wheels on the bus. I can't be sure, but I think he does it just slightly too slow, so you can't tell why it's creepy, but it really is, especially at 2 a.m. I do know him, and he's nice. I think he just babysits his grandkids a lot. I keep an eye on the local news in case the only lead is that the suspect whistled nursery rhymes when leaving the scene. I would be straight on that shit.
All I can picture is a trailer for a horror movie called The Wheels on the Bus, where he is whistling it slowly while images of him walking around cut to flashes of what is yet to come in the film.
Scene settles on the original poster eating cereal, peeking through the blinds. That guy's kind of fucking weird.
Chuckles lightly. That completely sounds like something a murderer would do on Midsummer Murders.
Story 13. This occurred in the winter in Michigan, when it was dark as night before school. I went out to the bus stop when I was in middle school. I was probably in 6th or 7th grade. It was right in front of my house, and my next-door neighbors had a nearly identical house, just flipped around. He was sitting in the front room with the light on and the curtains open, which I knew to be the den in our home. The neighbor was a pastor or some man of the cloth. He was sitting in a recliner or chair, buck naked. He noticed that I had just spotted him from the bus stop across the street, and he ran out of that room and up the stairs. I don't recall him speaking to me from that day until they moved away.
I'm surprised this happened in Michigan and not Portland, Oregon. My first week here, I was driving and got stuck behind a naked cyclist. Ass and balls for 3.25 miles. Not the last time, either.
A lot of them stand and don't sit. I do now remember seeing one guy with a fuzzy seat, almost like shag carpeting. I think it was traumatizing, and I tried to erase it from memory.
Yeah, I told my coworkers I stumbled upon the naked bike ride while driving between jobs once. Haha, cool. Lucky you. Yeah, absolutely not lucky me.
Story 14, trigger warning. When we first moved into our house, our neighbors across the street introduced themselves. They were nice enough, but there was always something off about the husband. He was almost overwhelmingly nice, but also extremely full of himself. But he helped my husband fix our lawn up and let us borrow his mower a couple of times while we saved up for our own. A few months into living here, we started hearing him yelling at his wife and kid a lot, very loudly. He would also get extremely drunk and sit in his car for hours talking to people on the phone and yelling. He had the police called on him multiple times, but nothing ever happened to him until he started drunk driving. He ended up running his car into another neighbor's car parked in their own driveway. I saw it happen and ran across the street to let his wife know. All she said was, "God damn it." She put her kid in the car and drove away, and he got arrested after resisting, right in his front lawn. The wife ended up moving out with their kid, but the husband continued to live there for a few months. He ended up getting fired from his job, lost his license, but still drove one of the cars around, and would stay holed up in the house for weeks at a time drinking. His wife would come by every few days to feed her animals that she couldn't keep where she was staying, her mother's small apartment, and would stay on the phone with a friend the whole time. One day we heard the police beating down their front door. They had to use a battering ram, and the wife came stumbling out covered in blood, head to toe. The husband had made it seem like he wasn't home by hiding the car on another street, and attacked her when she came to the house. He stabbed her in the stomach, chest, and face. She had to be airlifted to a hospital a couple hours away, and he barricaded himself in a closet. It took the police over an hour to get him out of the house, and he was crying and begging to be taken to the hospital. She gave one good jab in his arm while defending herself. She is okay physically, and he is still sitting in jail awaiting sentencing. He was offered a plea deal for 16 years, but he refused it. Their house still sits unoccupied. Story 15. I saw a neighbor a couple houses down walking in their backyard while talking on their phone, and then they just flipped out, started flailing their arms, running, spinning, and running again. A few days later, I saw them and they said they had walked through a big spider web. That was the reason for the episode.
Valid, LOL. I used to go horseback riding in the woods a lot with my mom, and for some reason she never rode through spider webs, but I hit several on almost every outing, even if she was leading the way. I swear those things are out to get me.
I learned early in life that if I need to go outside on a summer evening, like when taking out the trash, I should keep a stick or broom by the door. Huge spiders used to build webs across the stairs of my parents' front door, from banister to banister. I'd start waving the stick or broom around in front of me as I walked everywhere, around the deck between the patio furniture, under the outdoor umbrella where I also found a wasp nest, which was fun, between bushes, and so on. There was only one time in adulthood when I thought I was safe and didn't do this. I ended up walking through a web. I thought I was lucky and that the spider wasn't on it, but then it started to rapidly descend from my hair right in front of my face. Something neat that happened was my parents got the bushes removed from the sides of the stairs, so the spiders stopped building the webs across the stairs as much. They learned they could build a huge web in front of the nearby floodlight and feast because it's always swarming with bugs at night.
I have an archway over my front sidewalk that I made, and I grow flowers over it in the summer. It draws spiders in to set up camp in the fall. A few years ago, I got in the habit of taking a stick with me to walk through it, to wave in front of me to disturb any webs before they got on my face, while wearing long layers in the cooler weather. I think I now know where the witch with a magic wand thing came from. Chuckles, my neighbors probably think I'm crazy.
Story 16. Go to their car to fill up their cup. I'm assuming their alcohol was stashed there.
Chuckles lightly, yup. No alcohol allowed in my house. My sister excused herself out to her car a lot.
I keep my bubbly waters in my car, so I don't drink them as fast.
Hell yeah. Nothing like hot, bubbly water on a summer day.
Story 17. The other day, I saw a dad loading up the family minivan with kids. He was wearing a shirt and tidy whities. Surprised. I had to do a double take to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. Sure enough, no pants. Maybe he just had a crazy morning with the kids?
Chuckles. This is the real-life equivalent of those dreams in which you're minding your business in a crowd and suddenly look down and realize you have no pants on.
As a dad of 2 young kids, it sounds like he was just over it in the moment and didn't give a fuck. Been there.
Sometimes I let my dogs out dressed like Winnie the Pooh. Chuckles. Luckily, I have a ton of privacy.
Story 18. I had a neighbor with some kind of stimulant addiction who would be out in the middle of the night, watering her lawn and talking on the phone. She had a big gravelly voice and a cat named 69, and she would bellow the cat's name to get it to come home. Chuckles.
Glad you added the word home to the end of that.
Story 19. I think I've posted this story before, in case it sounds familiar. Slight chuckle. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I looked out my bedroom window one morning and saw the young couple in the apartment across from mine. Both were fully dressed and wearing FFP3 masks, but he was lying on his back and she was jerking him off at arm's length while standing at the foot of the bed. He clearly ejaculated just as I looked out the window, because there was a frantic scrabbling for tissues. I was impressed by their dedication to COVID safety. Chuckles.
Mankind's ability to become horny anytime, anywhere, and under any circumstance imaginable might actually be our best evolutionary trait. All the sexual kinks alone pretty much guarantee, no matter how bad or gross our situations might ever get, there will be somebody suddenly finding themselves walking around with a bubonic plague boner, or whatever extinction level event is occurring boner, aroused and into it.
Story 20. I was picking vegetables in my garden. I used my shirt as a kind of basket by pulling it away from my stomach and filling the pouch with tomatoes, peppers, and so on. I heard shouting from the camper parked in my neighbor's yard. I looked up. A woman in her mid to late 30s came flying out of the camper, topless. A man screaming was close behind. I was just standing there with my kangaroo pouch full of veggies. They noticed me and went back inside. Later that summer, my other neighbor stopped by to talk while I was outside working on my car. The man from the camper, who had been screaming at the topless woman, ended up going to jail and attempted to escape. He was hit and killed by a semi-truck while running down the highway, apparently. My tomatoes did really well that year. Story 21. Not a neighbor, but my mom and I watched my 18-year-old cousin outside of our grandmother's house. He was playing in the flower bed with a toy farm tractor and wagon while making engine noises. Chuckles softly. He finally looked up and saw us, quietly got up and left, and it was never mentioned again. And no, he's not slow, just apparently caught up in a moment of childhood joy.
I am over 50, and my husband and I both make engine noises anytime we have a toy vehicle in our hands. Hell, yesterday I made the air tire noise when I rounded a sharp corner with my shopping cart. Chuckles, you're never too old.
I love this. In a similarly whimsical manner, my husband does this bit where he treats the shopping cart like a horse. He'll make the cart buck and say, "Whoa, settle down, girl," as we make our way to the entrance. Very unserious.
I recently had an endoscopy, and when the nurse wheeled me in my hospital bed around the hall corner, I let out a skekakarartiki. Chuckles, ein chijiste shuste.
Story 22. Changed the bird feeders in the nude. That particular neighbor was in her mid-70s. Chuckles.
Honestly, I sleep naked and hate that I have to put clothing on for my neighbor's sake. I have to let my dog out every morning and literally only put clothing on for that reason.
I do too. Chuckles, my wife, will open the blinds on the weekends, and I stroll through the house unconcerned until I walk past a window to the outside. I wish I could say I was like Sasquatch or the alien from Signs, but I'm more like the ring guy from Kung Fu Hustle.
Casual, it's just a penis. We're all animals of the earth.
Story 23. She left for work and came home 9 hours later. The bizarre part is this woman had a baby around the same time we had our first baby. I was home playing with my 5-month-old in the yard. I could hear the baby next door crying until Mom got home. I called Child Protective Services and reported my suspicions. Mom went to jail and the baby was put in foster care. Turns out this is the 4th time Mom had a kid taken and put into foster care. Since it was an infant, I do know that Mom was sentenced to several years of jail time. I don't know how long she served.
In my city, there's a lady who had 2 children, 2 years apart, taken from her, put into foster care, and eventually adopted. She had a 3rd baby last year that she immediately lost custody of. She did not go home from the hospital with her baby. A little over 2 months later, the new family court judge in our county decided that the best thing would be to reunite the baby with the mother. Our local Child Protective Services begged the judge not to do that. One of the Child Protective Services workers told one of our local detectives that the baby was not going to make it. 2 weeks later, the baby was dead. I work in a position that gave me a front row seat to the aftermath and the interviews with the mother and father. I had to take time off work after that. I have mentally written so many letters to that judge in my head. He should have been one of the people that had to attend that autopsy because the detectives on the case had to, and they have to live with that for the rest of their lives. He is responsible for the death of that baby, and I blame him for the trauma I'm going to have to live with for the rest of my life. I hope it keeps him up at night like it does me.
When my wife and I were younger, we used to do foster care. One of the biological moms of a foster child we had just casually mentioned to us one day while we were doing a visit with her son that she was just going to keep having babies until the state let her keep one. She already had 7 kids, all in care, and only had supervised visits with 3 of them and no visitation with the other 4.
I worked in perinatology, which deals with high-risk pregnancies, and one day a patient came in. I recognized her from a very highly covered news story about how she would tie her 7-year-old son, I think he was 7, to a dresser and go out partying. In his last attempt to free himself, the dresser fell on him. I don't remember if he was just badly injured or if it killed him, but I know he ended up dying one way or another. I asked one of my co-workers, "Isn't she?" And she said, "Yeah, that's her." We can have as many opinions about this as we want, but we have to keep it professional. We didn't really get follow-ups on cases like that, but I haven't seen her on the news since. I can only hope that baby was taken away and is living a happy life now.
Story 24. Scream at a crow for cawing. Bro leaned out his second-floor bedroom window to shriek at a crow. The crow gave 0 fucks.
Mysterious. It remembers him, though. So soon he'll have a whole murder out there crowing. Chuckles.
Story 25. It's been a while, but one of our neighbors, a woman in her 40s, had an affair with a 17-year-old pizza delivery kid, and she was super open about it. Her kids would leave to walk to the school bus, and he'd show up 30 to 60 minutes later and stay until around 1:45 in the afternoon. She'd walk him out to his car with nothing on but a robe, usually very loosely tied, and they'd make out for a bit before he got in and drove off. When her husband found out, he was pretty chill about it. No big arguments, nothing noisy. He just informed her he was filing for divorce. The kids all wanted to stay with him, so he told her he was asking for the house. That's when it got weird because she didn't want the kids, but she did want the house. She came around to all our houses and yelled at whoever opened the door about how she was being kicked out and would lose her really nice house, and how we'd been unfair by snooping. I'm not sure how seeing something in the middle of the street is snooping, but whatever. Story 26. My neighbor had a dog named Tucker. My mom was visiting one day and came into the house saying the neighbor lady was screaming, "Fucker" at her. Chuckles. Story 27. Lawn shower. Picture a hairy, round, bald man taking a shower from the hose in his underwear on the front lawn. I don't know if he thought no one was watching or not, but it was seen, and my eyes haven't been the same since. Story 28. He stole my 30-year-old aloe plant that my grandmother gave me from my front porch. I told his wife, right in front of him, that I would rather not look at my security camera recordings of the thief. Chuckles. He returned it later that day. Story 29. Not me, but some friends of mine. They bought a house with a pool in the backyard. After a while, they became suspicious that someone was using it while they were at work, so they set up a couple of security cameras. It wasn't long before they caught the culprit, the very old man who lived next door. He would appear shortly after they left in the morning, completely naked, equipped with his own inflatable raft, and proceed to float around on it for a few hours.
What's better than having your own pool? Having a neighbor with a pool.
Story 30. We were having an outdoor birthday party for my niece at my parents' house. Chuckles. The neighbor was peering through a hole in the fence like in a cartoon. It was not a loud party. She was 3. Not even any music playing. There he was with his face to the wood until my aunt crept up alongside and squeezed a bottle of water through the hole in the fence. He yelped and grumpily headed into the house. Jim, you're a fucking weirdo.
I read that as the peeking neighbor was 3 and thought your aunt was really mean until the last 2 sentences. Chuckles.
Story 31. Not one of my neighbors, but me. Chuckles. I have a tendency to drink from a mason jar. So for years, I've been drinking water from a mason jar. The neighbors thought I was drinking moonshine all the time. One advantage. They thought I was bonkers, so most of them keep their distance.
That's hilarious, because I've drunk from mason jars my whole life too.
Story 32. I was out in my yard, and the guy next door was in his garage, yelling at someone. It sounded like a fight where he was loud and the other person wasn't. Took me a good few minutes to realize he was yelling at the radio. Chuckles, which was on a Christian station.
Chuckles. That sounds like me when I watched the Bondi hearings last week.
Story 33. Not sure if it counts, but I heard screaming at 1 a.m. Looked out my window and saw my neighbor streaking through her front yard naked. Drunk on Ambien. We'll never know. She jumped inside a giant black truck parked in front of her house. Turns out, boyfriends. Next thing I see, the guy running after her in his boxers. He grabs her by her boobs and pulls her out of the truck. Picks her up and carries her inside the house, titties and vulva blowing in the wind. Not violent, more like, what the heck have I gotten myself into? I'm terrified, but thank God the cops show up right about then. Now she's streaking back out to his truck. Cops getting the entire show. My husband returns home from a red-eye flight right in the middle of it all, and she decides he needs a show too. Did a whole streaking number for him as he walked up to our front door. Cherry on the cake. She had zero recollection until I asked if the cops enjoyed the show. She promptly sold the house a few months later. To be fair, I would have moved to a whole new state too. Story 34. I watched my trashy neighbors have a screaming match, and one of them angrily skated away on rollerblades.
Terry on skate from Reno 911 popped into my head.
There was a party house behind our building, and I used to hear all kinds of gems late at night. You rode some guy's dick in the parking lot. I only rode his dick because I was mad at you.
I was thinking of Speedo Guy from Bob's Burgers.
Story 35. My neighbor, a woman in her 60s, has obsessive-compulsive disorder and possibly Tourette syndrome. She has a fixation on her yard and can't tolerate even a single leaf on her lawn for any length of time. But she'll spend hours out there picking them up one by one, rather than dealing with them more efficiently. She also doesn't like to be observed by others, so she does a lot of her lawn care after dark. It's not an uncommon sight to see a headlamp bouncing around her yard at midnight while she picks up leaves one by one and places them into a bucket. Anyway, one night last summer, I was putting my 6-year-old to bed when we heard grunting, swearing, and weird ripping noises right outside his bedroom window, which is a shared space between our houses. My son was terrified and thought it was a monster. Nope, just our crazy-ass neighbor. She decided she also couldn't tolerate our leaves or the weeds growing on the side of our house. So she waited until after dark and took it upon herself to rip them out with her bare hands and dump them in a heap on our front lawn. Fun times. She also purposely lit her willow tree on fire last fall. A beautiful old tree that had been there for decades, but it just had the audacity to drop leaves on her lawn. Story 36. I heard some loud music all night. I looked out our rear bedroom window to see our neighbors behind us dancing. It was pretty funny, way over the top. He was throwing every move into his dance routine. My wife and I assumed he was on drugs. Chuckles. We spent a minute or so watching and having a giggle, then decided to stop, until we saw him begin to absolutely beat the shit out of his kitchen door. His fist went straight through the thing. Then he kicked and punched it repeatedly until it was completely destroyed. Then he went straight back to dancing. Story 37. A long time ago, when I was in high school, I managed to take this girl I really liked up to a cabin in a little mountain lake town to stay with my family. We snuck out to my car one evening to hang out and get some privacy, overlooking this serene little nighttime mountain street, with people's porches flickering. Very romantic. Suddenly, the neighbor across the street, directly in front of us, slides the window open, sticks his bare ass out, and rips the most absurdly loud and disgusting fart that echoes down the entire street. Then slams the window shut. We died laughing. Story 38. That neighbor was me. I sleep naked. One morning, I was woken up by a terrible racket in the garden. So I quickly put on my dressing gown and went out to find our small dog Bradley barking and chasing a screaming blackbird fledgling, slightly too young to easily take flight. The mum blackbird had joined in, chasing Bradley and threatening him with all kinds of beak-related violence if he touched one feather on her baby's head. I joined the pursuit, trying to get hold of Bradley, and my sloppily tied dressing gown belt very quickly gave up the unequal struggle. Picture the scene. A young blackbird, a small scruffy dog, an adult blackbird, a middle-aged woman with her dressing gown flapping open, all yelling at the tops of our voices. Eventually, the baby bird ran under the hedge. I scooped Bradley up. The mum blackbird went after her baby with one final squawk in our direction, and I turned towards the house. It was only then that I realized what a grandstand view my poor neighbors must have had of the whole performance. It was days before I could look them in the eyes again.
I have chickens, so I'm stealing beak-related violence.
Steal away, I'm glad you liked it. And yes, they can be vicious little dinosaurs, can't they?
Story 39. Kissing his window or licking. Still not sure what he was up to. I pretended I saw nothing and never asked about it.
Well, a window licker is someone who is dim, so maybe a few sandwiches short of a picnic?
Story 40. One time, when I was 16, I had my first real date. When I went to my car, I realized I had locked both my phone and keys inside. I walked to my neighbor's yard to get some help. My neighbor was a sweet, hard-working man who led a good life. He was also the most eccentric person I've ever known. He was sunbathing in his boat. His boat was dry-docked in his driveway with no water for miles around us, wearing nothing but a Speedo and sunglasses. Chuckles. I explained what was happening and said, "Could you help me break into my own car and maybe call my mother?" He immediately said yes and got up. So my 60-ish-year-old neighbor showed me how to break into a car using a coat hanger, all while wearing nothing but a Speedo, right there in my front lawn. He has long since passed away, but I hope he knew how much good he put into the world, even if he was a little weird. I don't believe in an afterlife, but if there is one, he's one of the first people I'd like to see and thank.
Chuckles. I had a neighbor who'd sunbathe on his boat. It took up the whole driveway, so he parked in the street. I asked him why, and he said he was using it as a deck since we weren't really near any large bodies of water. Honestly, props to that guy.
Story 41. My former asshole of a neighbor would sit just inside the door of a second-story room that opened to a balcony. His balcony overlooked his and my backyard. He owned racing pigeons. My half-acre yard was a combination monarch butterfly way station and a habitat for local critters. I would periodically find dead raptors in my yard. After the third one, I started examining them for injuries and discovered they had been shot. I called a buddy who works for California Fish and Wildlife and told him what I found. We scheduled a time to meet up so he could pick up the bird carcasses. I collected 3 more. He asked me to freeze them for evidence. He installed tiny game cameras in my backyard and a neighbor's backyard, focusing on that door. The cameras captured a bunch of photos showing him sitting in a chair with a rifle, shooting birds that were resting on a telephone pole in my yard, bordering a common fence with his pigeon coop. He ended up arrested and charged with federal crimes because the raptors are federally protected. He was sentenced to probation, community service, and a $15,000 fine for having killed 7 raptors that we knew of. Yeah, I'm one of those people. I called the law. Some things I just can't ignore, especially animal cruelty.
Bless your heart. So glad you didn't let him get away with it. Shooting raptors, awful protected or not, they are an important part of the ecosystem. And there is nothing I despise more than animal, bird, reptile, or child cruelty.
What a numbskull. Where did he think the bullet was going to land when it missed or went through? In my city, he could also be charged for endangering others. Strange that nobody heard the shots, however.
Possibly an air rifle or a pellet gun. My stepson has one, and it's quiet enough that you wouldn't hear it unless you were close.
Story 42. I live near an elderly couple on the autism spectrum. One day, I come home from dropping my son off at school and running errands, and the wife is standing on my deck, right next to the living room, looking into my house like she's waiting for something. My partner was home at the time, so I was confused why she was just standing there. He would have answered had she knocked. I go to greet her, and she starts listing off every pattern of colors from our Christmas tree, how many times each color appeared, and at which part of the tree. We got blackout curtains that same day. Chuckles.
That was actually a huge compliment about your holiday decor choices.
Story 43. My neighbor still doesn't know that I know. She's in her early 60s, putting up her clothes to dry out on the line, completely naked. I was in my kitchen, just looking out to my backyard, and saw some movement. So I looked to the left, and there she was, naked, bent over, picking up a shirt from the laundry basket. I ran away from the windows. Story 44. Of course I didn't see him, but I heard him fart so loudly that the whole house could hear him. Chuckles. Story 45. I live in a sketchy neighborhood. I once watched two random dudes share a can of hairspray with each other. Apparently they had hot dates or something. Chuckles.
Just guys being dudes. Chuckles lightly. It's good to have a support system.
Story 46. I was the weird neighbor. When I was about 10, I lived in a wooded and rural place. There were pastures, cows, and houses mostly, and a lot of woods between properties. I would frequently trespass because I was exploring, and I mostly had it in my head that my neighbors wouldn't care because I was a child. One day I had gotten lost, an event that only happened once, but I knew I was way further north than I'd ever been, and a road used by semi-trucks was to the west. So I headed west until I could hear the road, and then went south, knowing I would soon recognize where I was. However, I came upon two men, one old and one young, with a tractor and trailer, just working the land, clearing the brush. I tucked myself down into some growth and watched for a bit, calculating a path around them. The whole area was tall grass and stick-like trees, and I almost made it. On the other side of them were my woods, familiar. Right before getting out of their sight, I popped up to look at them, and the young guy and I made direct eye contact. I immediately dropped and scuttled off. I still think about him. Chuckles. Just out there helping Dad or Grandpa. And this little girl with wild hair and probably dirty, just popping around like a prairie dog and then disappearing into the woods. I hope he's okay.
I just imagine him becoming a writer after that. Because nobody would believe him if he told it as a true story. But if he could work it into a piece of fiction, he could finally tell someone.
Story 47. My sister's neighbor is an elderly lady, and she cuts her grass with regular hand scissors. I'm talking bent over for hours on end, just chomping away. Chuckles.
I had a neighbor who did this. She used orange-handled kitchen scissors that she sharpened in the shed, which had a lawnmower and shears in it. She was lovely, and the garden was postcard perfect, though. That's how we knew when dementia had begun. She started messing up the lawn and not tending the borders.
Story 48. I saw my neighbor literally vacuum his driveway, not blow leaves, every Saturday. Chuckles, it's made of concrete.
Every Saturday that is made of concrete. Memoirs from detention.
To be honest, I once had to use a shop vac to clean broken glass from my lawn after a severe storm blew through. I'm sure I looked like a crazy person vacuuming my lawn. Chuckles didn't need kids cutting their feet on shattered glass, though.
My neighbor put carpet in his garage and vacuums it every time they pull out of the garage. He also shovels his driveway nonstop when it's snowing. Normally, I wouldn't say that was weird, but we have a company that plows our driveways, snow blows the sidewalks, and shovels the walkways to the front doors. He's just old and retired and likes doing things. So I don't mind, but it just seems strange.
Story 49. This isn't my story, but my friend was walking behind a guy he knew. The guy picked up an acorn, cracked it, ate it, then spat it out. Chuckles, my friend was like, "Did you just try to eat an acorn?" The guy said, "Yeah, I see these squirrels going crazy for them, and I thought there might be a reason why."
They're edible, but unless you get rid of the tannins, they taste awful. They were a staple for some Native American peoples.
You can buy them at grocery stores. They are gross, though. This reminds me of a guy I was walking behind on my way into work a few weeks ago. A carpet of fallen acorns on the sidewalk. The fellow was cracking them open for his dog to munch on. Yes, acorns are toxic to dogs. No, the pair didn't seem to know that.
Story 50. I saw my neighbor climb up on his roof to spray a hornet's nest. And then he got attacked by those hornets and almost fell off the roof. He was swatting at them and moving erratically. Then he just disappeared. His wife and grown kids were on the ground watching him, so I knew he had other eyes on him. 20 minutes later, he appeared in the backyard with large red welts all over his head and face. Story 51. The wildest one I've heard was a guy on his balcony around 2 a.m., wearing a full robe, watering obviously fake plastic plants while whispering, "Grow, grow," to them. Chuckles. Then he stopped, saluted the ficus, did 2 perfect marching steps, and went back inside like nothing happened. Harmless, but I think about it way more than I should. Story 52. Not seen, just heard, but I'm sure it looked funny too. Chuckles. Back in the day when I still lived back home in a small village, the neighbors were this elderly couple. One of their grandkids is, I don't know, just kind of slightly slow, plus he's hearing impaired, so he talks kind of weird and comes across as a simple guy. When he was like 8 to 10 years old, I was in the bathroom once, small window open, and I could hear the kid come over to his grandparents and play cops at the door. He starts yelling, "This is the police. Open the door or I will break down the door. I'm gonna count to 3 and then I'm gonna break down the door. 1, 2, Techar, no. I'm gonna count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 and 1/4. 9 and a half. 9 and 3/4. And teen. Brap, 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 brap. I remember it very vividly to this day. I was laughing so hard. It was like 50% cute little kids play and 50% naked gun-like slapstick vibe. Story 53. Full karaoke performance in complete silence with headphones on. Haha. I once saw my neighbor absolutely belting out what I assume was an emotional 80s ballad. But he had noise-canceling headphones on. No music audible. Just dramatic hand gestures and power stances in total silence. It was oddly wholesome. It made me realize everyone has their weird decompression rituals. Story 54. Chuckles. Caught someone next door taking selfies with their cat for a solid 20 minutes straight.
This also isn't bizarre, but just funny. Chuckles. I watched our friends' neighbors in the basement flat, with a great view from street level, wrestle their enormous Maine Coon into a bumblebee outfit for about 5 minutes.
Chuckles. Certainly not as bizarre as a neighbor watching for 20 minutes.
Story 55. A few years ago, I saw my neighbor outside washing his wife's car in the middle of some pretty heavy rain. It was a Sunday, and by the look on his face, I'm guessing he'd been drinking, got into a fight with his wife, and just wanted to get away from her. But that's all speculation. Still cracks me up thinking about it. Chuckles. Story 56. Deals drugs and uses drugs. He was found standing on a milk crate at the corner of his house at 2 a.m., staring out into the dark with a hairdryer in his hand. Chuckles. Story 57. My neighbor in Germany waters his driveway. Not plants, the concrete driveway. Every single morning at 6 a.m. I've lived next to this man for 3 years, and I still can't figure out why. I asked him once, and he just said, "It needs it," and walked away.
After initial curing, concrete can get stronger in water. But no, it doesn't need it.
Story 58. I have a neighbor that I've only ever seen in the middle of the night, and she's always gardening with an extremely bright headlamp. I've seen her out there in heavy, heavy rain at 1, 2, 3 a.m. dozens of times over the years and never once during the day. She has about a 1/4 acre plot, and I haven't seen her backyard, but let's just say that the front yard looks like someone did all of the landscaping and gardening in the dark. That being said, I've wondered for years what her deal might be. Gardening in torrential rain at 1 a.m. Sounds to me like some sort of mental health issues might be part of it. But I'd so love to learn that she's just a zany garden lady who likes the quiet that night brings to our neighborhood. Maybe she's allergic to the sun? I don't know. Chuckles. Story 59. My neighbor across the hall fucks women's husbands in the building. Several times, the wives have found out and come to the door. She's a real bitch.
My neighbor, she's moved now, was the woman who had an affair with my ex, and the reason we split up. I only found out after we'd split. I'd been away with my new partner, only to come home and see her standing in the next door entrance hall, smoking. Couldn't believe my eyes. She was living with another boyfriend, then cheated on him with a married man, who I also know. Now she's back with my ex, married him, and lives in my old house that I'd bought and renovated with him. I still call her the whore next door.
Philosophically, the husband is the one who took a marriage vow and broke it, making him much more of a bitch than the temptress could ever be. Empirically, only one of these bitches is bringing multiple angry wives to the hall outside my front door.
Fucking outrageous. As a husband, I'm offended. For God's sake, can you let me know where she lives so I can avoid her?
Story 60. They cut down a Christmas tree for themselves from the protected conservation area in our neighborhood.
Dude, what trashy people. A lot of these are funny, or maybe gross. That neighbor is a shithead.
Story 61. Chuckles, nothing much, but my neighbor decided to trim my hedge himself. His wife left him soon after.
Huh. No, literally. But I'm dying now, bro.
Story 62. My neighbor got the paper every morning in his boxers and slippers, or boots, depending on the weather. I lived next to him for the first 18 years of my life. Rain, shine, or deep snow, he was always in his boxers. He was a named partner at a law firm too, and about 50 years older than me. If you happened to be outside at the same time as his paper routine, you'd get a wave and a hello. Chuckles. Story 63. Saw my 60 or 70-year-old grandpa neighbor do a cartwheel while gardening. Chuckles, to this day, my kids and I call him Grandpa Parkour, not to his face. Story 64. It's not bizarre, but he'll go into the backyard and practice his golf swing. Lovely man. He owns a house that's been surrounded by townhouses. I'll sit on my balcony, and he'll come out and practice his swing. He caught me watching once, got embarrassed, and went back inside. I felt horrible. Anytime I catch him in the yard, I go back inside to give the man some privacy. Story 65. I live next door to a sex dungeon. Yes, this is literally what the person using it calls it. It's a piece of land with a small brick building. It isn't a house. Think of it like a workshop sort of thing. She rents the place to run her dominatrix business from. I see all her different clients coming and going, and I've seen things I never thought I would see in my life. Elderly men dressed in PVC French-made outfits. Naked men wearing cock rings. Parties of men all dressed in their particular fetish outfits. My friends all think it's fascinating. To be honest, I'm not particularly bothered other than them having a very loud gate. Story 66. Best neighbor anyone could have. If you had a problem, ask him, and he'd know who to call. And if the help didn't arrive as fast as he expected, he was on the phone. Plumbers, electricians, tree removal, they all wanted to be on his list because he was the go-to guy for the community. He was a very dignified older guy, calm, level-headed, especially in a crisis. Then one windy trash day, I saw him take a box to the curb. When he set it down, a few packing peanuts escaped. So he chased them, but when he tried to put them back into the box, more came out. As he went after those, a flap on the box opened and the wind caught more. He walked back and kicked the box, which made it turn over and release the full swarm of peanuts. He just stood there in the middle of them flying, then started to attack the box. He kicked it, threw it, ripped pieces off of it, all with a bunch of peanuts stuck to his clothes. Then, very calmly, he put the box pieces into his garbage can and went inside. I never told him that I saw it happen. Chuckles. Story 67. Chuckles? I read one story about a naked neighbor, and suddenly I'm reading every other story here as if the neighbor was nude. Story 68. Watering her plants in heavy rain, and on a separate occasion, using her leaf blower in her driveway while we were in the middle of about a week of winds over 40 miles per hour. Story 69. I'm the asshole in this situation. My neighbor's driveway is right next to my bedroom, and she is a diva who was talking really loud and singing at the top of her lungs at 5 a.m. and wouldn't shut the fuck up one Saturday morning after I had a stressful week. I love my weekends, being able to sleep in, but she woke me up and I couldn't go back to sleep. Turns out they were getting ready for a garage sale. I have another room with a really badass sound system that is also right next to their driveway. I opened my windows and blasted the full Meshuggah catalog for around 4 hours. Chuckles. I closed the door to that room and went to watch movies in my living room, where it's far enough away that I barely heard it. I haven't had a problem since, and that was about 3 years ago.